Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now today I'm actually in the train room. I haven't actually recorded an intro from the train room for quite some time, so thought it was well overdue for a change of scenery. So firstly, I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas and enjoyed the festive season with your family and friends. So in this episode we're going to work a little bit further on the coal merchant's yard, and in particular the actual yard area itself. Now I am combining this with another video which I'll also upload at the same time, which is looking at the laser cutter that I use. Now I've had quite a few people asking about what laser cutter I use and how I go about cutting out the various different base shapes and so forth that I use in my scratch building. So there's a link in the top corner to that particular video, because as we progress through this video there is some brick wall that I make for the coal merchant's yard, and that actually goes into a little bit more detail in the other video, which is about the actual laser cutter that I use. So along with the laser cutter video and this video, these two videos will be the last videos for 2022. So I think without further ado, let's just get into what I got up to with the coal merchant's yard. So referring back to the previous video with this coal merchant's yard, and of course this is the paper template that I initially started with. I've actually chopped a chunk off this corner. Not quite sure why I did that, but there was actually more to this template. So this sort of roughly worked out where the boiler repair workshop was going, plus also a sort of a small workshop office area for the coal merchant's yard as well. So that was the paper template, and of course in the last episode we got as far as constructing the workshops. So I've now installed this to an MDF base, so that is a separate component, because basically I want to be able to lift this building off to be able to install wiring and lights and all of that type of stuff. So I haven't progressed any further with this at this stage in terms of this workshop, because it probably won't be till early next year that I'll get the items that I'd like to put inside this workshop. So in the meantime I've been working on the coal merchant's yard area, and I've started making up the base for the yard area. So we've got a small section of pavement which is going to tuck in here and give the corner around the edge of the road here, and then we've got the base for the coal merchant's yard here. And the idea simply is that I can take this building on and off if I need to, and it just simply slots in there. So it's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle in some respects. So what I've actually done with this base, rather than hand cut it out, I've actually put it through the computer and laser cut this shape. Means that I can get a nice even curve, and also get a nice even curve for this part of the pavement. And you'll see there's some wee slots in here. Now they are going to accommodate some brick wall that's going to run along here and also down this edge here. So the reason behind that really is I think it might just give it a little bit of extra strength, because what I'm planning on doing is these base sections will be actually fixed permanently to the actual baseboard section. This piece here will be the only component that will actually be able to be lifted out if need be. So what I've actually been working on, and this ties in with the other video which specifically relates to the laser cutter I use, and that is creating these brick walls that are going to run around the perimeter of the coal merchant's yard. So we'll get on with actually installing these walls and also actually working in some cobblestone area through here as well. Plus also I've worked on some coal saves or coal bunkers, whichever they're called, that are going to run along here. So rather than buying a ready-made set of coal saves, I've fashioned a custom set which of course runs with the curve of the line. Right, so we'll take a look at assembling the brick walling that is going around the coal merchant's yard. So this is the base section, and then of course, as I've previously shown, the workshop building tucks in to the corner there. So I've pre-made up these brick wall sections. So these have been laser cut, and of course if you go through to the accompanying video on the laser cutter, it goes through the process of how these were cut out. But essentially it's a set of layers of 1mm card that are then sandwiched together, and then of course some column strips, and then we have these tabs at the bottom of the brick walls, and they slot in to the slots that are in the actual baseboard piece itself. So just taking a closer look at that, that's how it slots in for the brick walls, and I think it's just going to give it that extra bit of strength, as I mentioned earlier. So the other components too that I'm worked up as well is the cobblestone areas. So what I've actually done in terms of these cobblestone pieces is I've pre-cut out where their positioning and sizes will actually go. So for example, when this wall is actually installed, and I'll do these walls first, the cobblestone sheet actually connects up with the vertical columns on the brick wall. So if we slot in that wall there, and then there's another big section here that goes in, would help if it was around the right way, and that component goes in there. So you can sort of see how I've decided to put it all together, and then of course this wall here will run along that edge, so on and so forth. So there's a big chunk that you can see missing out of the cobblestone area here, and that is actually where the coal save is going. And as I mentioned, I've scratch built this coal save because I really need it to fit in with the curvature of the line. So the coal save itself is made up of strips of balsa wood, and then we've got some bracing around the back edge, and then there's sort of more bracing in here. So the plan is, what I'm going to do is paint all of this up black along here. That'll disguise the base, and then of course add a lot of weathering powders, mainly black obviously for coal dust, and then of course I'll fill these bunkers with some coal. So I did record a little bit of a process about how I assembled this, and what I actually used is a bit of polystyrene on a curve, the same curve as this, in order to plan out the vertical battens and then apply these strips. And then of course I just used some pins to hold it all down. I sort of felt that I needed to get the curve first a little bit, because if I'd actually made this up on a flat surface, you'd find that the curvature with the battens on the inside would actually start to squeeze together. So hence why I use that method. So there's various other pieces here, there's little bits of end wall, and they're already sort of pre-assembled in certain ways so that they can lock in with all the different unusual angles, once again more unusual angles on the layout, so these components will actually tuck in various corners. So we'll start putting this together, and once again I'll speed through this process and then come back to it and have a look at the end result. Right, so I've now got the walls all installed, and we've also got the cobblestone texture down in the yard area, and I've added some capping stone to the top of the walls, which is the same method I used around the warehouse, which is laser cut card, but it's also engraved with a groove. And once this is dry, I'll drizzle some super glue over it to give it that durable, hard finish. So we've now got the coal staithes in there. They're not permanently fixed in, but they've now been painted with a black base, and then I've heavily weathered the balsa wood to really grime it up and make it look filthy. So that is a combination of weathering powders and dark washes and so forth to get that looking pretty damn filthy and grimy, which is what they would have been. So I'm just going to set this component aside, and I've been looking at this component here, which of course is the building. Now this door here, because of the way I've cut the base, I've decided to make this a fixed door, so I've actually glued that to the side wall, and we've now added a little bit of cobblestone in between here where the doorway entrances are. So what I'm actually looking at now is the doors for the front, and what I have put together so far is a small bit of pavement that's going to run along here, and as I mentioned in the previous video, I've cut some notches in the pavement where the base of the door will actually slide along. So if we take a look at that, if it will focus, you can see these two notches, which is where the door will slide. So how this is actually going to work is the door has to be fixed into place, well, not fixed into place, positioned, I should say. So the door is going to be positioned there, and I better make sure I get these around the right way. And the other door here, and then we can then glue this pavement into place. And essentially what that pavement's going to do is it's going to stop the door from actually falling out. So now we can just slide the door along to any position we want, whether it be closed or open or half open. So that's the plan. So I'm just actually waiting for some paint to dry in here. So what I've done is I've just painted in around the base here with just a dark greyish sort of paint, because that will sort of help to indicate a sort of a dark recess in here where the door slides. And then I've also actually just painted around the edges of the MDF with a kind of colour similar to the pavement. So the paint's now well and truly dry, so we're now going to install this pavement and the doors at the same time. So this, I'm just using a bit of PVA glue, but what I'm doing is applying it very sparingly, because the last thing I want is the glue to actually ooze out from underneath and of course glue the doors. So I'm going to avoid the area where the actual notches are in this pavement, and just spread the glue out with a stiff bristle brush and get as close as I can, but I just don't want that glue squeezing out underneath. Otherwise we'll defeat the purpose of these doors being positionable. Right, so we'll pop the doors in position. And then apply the pavement slabs. Now, I think somebody actually asked a question in a previous video about what I actually use for the paving slabs, and this is just simply the Metcalfe paving slabs, which I actually find pretty good. I know that a lot of people go to the trouble of applying individual slabs on the pavement, and of course then you get the three-dimensional relief of the slabs, but I sort of find it's a little bit excessive in some respects, because when you think about the crack that might be between each of the slabs, could be 5 or 10 millimeters. If you scale that down, then it's absolutely minimal in terms of a 1 in 76 scale. So I find these printed Metcalfe paving slabs quite satisfactory for this job. So that's now glued into place, and we should be able to just slide these doors to any position we want. And if we tip it up, the doors stay in. So we've got the plastic tab that sits in under the track here, and then the pavement holding the bottom of the door. So that actually works quite well. I'm quite happy with that. So I may have this one closed and maybe this one is open. So that's worked out quite well. So we'll continue the paving around here, and I'll just actually show you what I do when it comes to these curves around here, and extend this pavement down this side of the building. Right, so what I like to try and do is line up the course of the paving slab so that you sort of more or less get a seamless join. So I've just got to work out where the slab is going to go through here So we'll just trim off some of the excess pavement here. Say we only probably need about that much. And we've got to line this up with where it's going to go. And of course one of the other considerations is the wall does actually recess in slightly, so I've got to factor that in as well. So we'll start by just trimming to meet up with this section of pavement this way. So it's just slightly in on the edge here. And I'm just going to make a wee mark here. Where I think the pavement's going to meet this section of wall. So I just use a bit of scrap card basically to get a measurement of this. So I can repeat that down at this end. So there's a bit of working out involved here obviously, but I usually find it's just better to do it in situ rather than having to work out exact measurements and things like that. So I'm just going to test that, and it needs a little bit more of it. So you know, this is the sort of the process that I use to get the pavement slabs lined up correctly. So it's a bit of trial and error. So now that we've got that, I think the right depth, then we can actually mark out where these end wall columns are. So as you can see, I'm working from the building edge outwards and still have plenty of excess for trimming off on the outer pavement edge. So that's got that tucked in there, and it fits around these extended wall sections here, and it's pretty close. I'm reasonably happy with how that's lined up there. And then what I'm actually just going to do is turn it over and then draw a line on the underside. Then I can trim this off here and just check again. So every time I do a cut, I'm always sort of checking that it's in the right position and that it fits nicely, and then we can trim off this edge. And that's got the bulk of the pavement set up. So as you can see around here, I've got a recessed in piece, so I cut these sections out on corners. So essentially what I can do is then wrap with a little bit of care a edge strip, which is only very thin, and then that is actually forced around this corner in order to create the edging stones that run around here. So what I've got to do is trim off this extra bit of pavement here to line up for a edging stone, and what I've actually got to consider is there's still actually just a slight bit of a curve there actually, so I may have to actually just come in just a bit. And then what I'm going to have to do is just cut by hand just this little section that's sitting on the end here. And now we have this sort of edge around here, which I'm going to wrap this bit of edging So we'll glue this into place. And then I'll just use the handle of the tweezers just to push it into the corners. And then for the edging stone, what I actually do is use some of the rocket card glue, because this works so much better. You also get a lot more control over applying the glue too, using a toothpick. So we're just going to drizzle some rocket card glue around this edge first, and this is the more tricky part, and particularly this one because it's quite a tight curve. And what I do is just sort of take the strip and just encourage it a little bit first by bending it. You sort of have to be very careful because you don't want to actually sort of delaminate or crinkle the actual card. So this just sort of gets it going in terms of its curve. Because it's quite a thin and narrow piece of card, it does actually bend reasonably well. So I'm just going to push that into there, and the main thing is to get that first point anchored so that it doesn't spring out. If there's any slight sort of scuffing or anything like that, then generally I'll just tidy that up with a bit of paint or possibly some colouring in pencils, and then it's just a case of applying glue down the straight section. So that's pretty much how I do the corners around paving areas, and it sort of works all right. And usually what I do, and I've started doing that, is I then draw some vertical lines down from these corner paving slabs or edge slabs to create the join that runs down on the actual curb itself. So that's as far as I've got now with the coal merchant's yard, and it's certainly starting to take shape, and I'm quite happy with the repositionable sliding doors for the workshops. And also another feature that I'm quite happy with, of course, is the coal saves. They have come out reasonably well. So the items left to do with this coal merchant's yard, of course, is weathering. Of course, there is coal to go in the coal saves. And then, of course, I'm waiting on some items that will be going into the interiors of these workshops. And it's not until I get those items, of course, that I can then install the roof on the workshops. Now, one thought I did have about the roofs was to make them in such a way that I can actually remove the roof, so that anyone who's interested can actually peer in and look at the detail. So I'm going to work out a system where I can certainly be able to take the roofs off and position them back in when needed. So some other aspects too that of course will be added will be the lighting, as I've mentioned, and also the idea of a flickering arc welder as well, plus also some derelict old gates too that I'd like to put on to the entrance into the coal merchant's yard. So there we have it for the final episode of 2022. I certainly hope that you enjoyed this episode and gathered some inspiration and ideas, of course, for your own layouts. And don't forget to flick over to the video that I've featured the laser cutter that I use. So for anyone who's interested in the process, what gear that is actually used in making up these laser cut components, that's all featured in the other video. I'll also pop a link in the description below to that video as well. So I'll sign off for now, and before I head off, I'd just like to wish everyone a very happy new year, and I will see you again in 2023. So do take care, everyone. Look after yourselves. Of course, course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.